How can the Ravens improve during the 2022 season? We talk about that and more with a very special guest next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, I'm your host, Kevin Ostrecker of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. And today's episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. Make your moment sparkle with Julie from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Use code Locked On at checkout. We're back for a special Wednesday edition of the show. The guest that I've been meaning to have on for a very long time. I'm excited to have him join me here today. Ken McKusick of Filmstudy. Ken, I'm really excited to have you on. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me, Kevin. Happy to talk some Ravens.
Yeah, it's exciting. We're in an exciting time, kind of the down period of the offseason right now, mini camp in the books. But I wanted to first start off, Ken, with your thoughts on this offseason. And I know we've talked about it before on your show. So let's start off with free agency. I mean, this team, not really a ton happening on the first day. In fact, nothing happening on the first day. But then they sign Marcus Williams, 5 years, $70 million. They bring in Morgan Moses, bring in Zadarius Smith for like a couple hours, and then ends up signing Michael Pierce and a couple other guys. How'd you feel like they did overall based off of your needs and your checklist for them heading into the free agency period?
I think they've more or less checked the boxes. It was interesting that the interaction between the draft and free agency is what I'd point to as being the really interesting moment for the Ravens offseason. They signed Marcus Williams, and one of the nice things about that is you're signing a player for premium money, but at a premium position in terms of what that a pure free safety would cost you in the draft. You'd have to take a premium pick for it. So you think at least, for a team that has a lot of needs coming into the draft, they've taken care of one of the premium needs with a big premium signing. And then they went ahead and drafted Kyle Hamilton anyway. So that was kind of the weird double.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people thought from a positional value perspective, Hamilton's position being safety, some people thought, well, a cornerback would have been better or a wide receiver would have been better. But Hamilton, I thought, represented the best value in the draft, thus I think making it the best pick of their draft. They had a couple other picks that I really liked. Who were some underrated picks in that class? Because you look at Hamilton, you look at Linderbaum, but I think they also get a lot of credit for what they did in the mid rounds.
Yeah, I mean, I like Travis Jones. I think that was a good pick. I thought in the fourth round they got some good value there as well. I mean, if you talk about Kolar and Likely, who seems to have been doing pretty well so far at minicamp and OTAs, I think that they've got a lot of value up and down the draft. I think some of the work that was done by Peter King being embedded with the Ravens during the thing and really going over the choices they made through the fourth round, including the punter. Jeffrey Stout was a good one. It seems like Darian Williams. I don't know yet who this guy is. He's one of the guys I'm really looking for at camp because it's a big Ravens position of need. So I think they did well through a lot of the later rounds. The big risk pick they have is Linderbaum. That's the one that it could really work out or it could really not work out. And I'm extremely hopeful. I think he'll give the Ravens some things. They'll be very positive, but the last two players who are drafted that were similar to him did not work out in the NFL. And they're awfully similar comps when you get right down to it, and Garrett Bradbury and Billy Price.
Right, I was going to mention Bradbury as somebody who a lot of people do compare Linderbaum to. Was there a situation?
You can't tell those starts. You cannot tell those scouting reports apart. By the way.
Yeah, they are very similar players. Hopefully, it does work out a lot better for Linderbaum. I know the size knock on him, the arm length knock on him, but he does have a lot of mobility. Were there any players that you were honing in on at 25, Ken, outside of Linderbaum? I know Jermaine Johnson was still available. Were there other guys?
Jermaine Johnson would have been great, and I know there were some other concerns with him, so I don't want to get into that. But here's the interesting double, I think, was this. The Ravens had a chance to take Kaiir Elam at number 23. Had they done so, they could have also then taken Zach Tom with their last pick in the fourth round, and that would have fulfilled the same two positional needs at cornerback and center that they essentially filled with Linderbaum and Armour-Davis. And they did pick up an extra 4th-round pick in that process. And I don't know which one it ended up being of the players drafted, but they did pick up an extra 4th-round pick. But I think that probably would have been a safer bet on Zach Tom having the good arm length to play center, a little less fast, but still quick enough. I mean, he's a very quick offensive lineman. But I would have liked that combination, I think, a little better. And the Bills obviously took Kyrie Lim at 23 with the pick the Ravens traded him.
Right. And another pick that I know some people weren't entirely happy with, I was personally ecstatic, but David Ojabo in the 2nd round, just because of when is he coming back with the Achilles injury. Do you feel like that was a worthwhile investment for them, even if he doesn't play a snap here in 2022?
I don't think I would put if I knew right off the bat he's not going to play a single snap in 2022, he's going to lose the year developmentally completely. I'd say that probably makes the pick not a good one. That's my own pick. He's a top shelf talent, but you got to get something out of these players developmentally in that first year. And you look at what happened to Patrick Queen. That's a cautionary tale of how developmental time lost is very significant. And Patrick Queen, of course, he was available to play his first year. He just hadn't really played the position all that much in college. Very similar to Ojabo. He hadn't played the inside linebacker for very long, and he didn't have a preseason because of the COVID year. And those things combined to create a set of not good circumstances that obviously have led Patrick Queen's development to be somewhat stunted.
And I know with the development of these players, the Ravens are in a situation where they can always be competitive, and they always draft not just for need because they don't need to, but also the best player available. We saw it with Hamilton, but Ojabo was a pick at a position of need at outside linebacker that you could argue still today when we're talking here, Ken, is still a position of need for them. Do you see them bringing in someone? I know they put the UFA tender on Justin Houston. They visited with Jason Pierre-Paul. Is that the biggest area where you would say, yeah, the Ravens definitely need to add somebody here? Or would you maybe put that at wide receiver or maybe inside linebacker?
I don't think I'd put it at wide receiver, and I don't think I'd put it inside linebacker. So I think it's still edge. There's a lot of flags that would have you concerned about the Ravens' edge situation. We don't know what the circumstances are with Tyus Bowser, and then they go out and sign not one but 2 guys, in Vince Beagle and the other coverage outside linebacker just recently signed the last couple of days.
Oh, Stephen Means.
Yeah, Stephen Means. To potentially replace him at Sam, or at least be a backup at Sam. You think they'd accumulated enough guys with coverage ability now at outside linebacker, they wouldn't have to do that. But the reason it's scary is that it may mean something about where Bowser is. So, yeah, these guys might just end up being camp bodies or depth guarantees. But if you need a depth guarantee, that means you're not entirely sure about what's going on. So they have 6 or 7 guys that play outside linebacker going under the roster into the preseason. That'll be fine, and they'll end up having to cut a couple of those. We don't know yet. This is one of the interesting things about McDonald is how he's going to actually align his defense, whether it'll be as outside linebacker reliant as it was with Wink.
Yeah, and I think another name to throw in there is the cross-training of Malik Harrison, who I know John Harbaugh talked about would be able to play some Sam. How do you feel that fit is?
I think there's very little chance we'll actually see that in play. So there's 2 players who are talked about as being versatile at the linebacker position right now for the Ravens. One of them is Vince Beagle, who's supposed to be an inside linebacker / outside linebacker. Vince Beagle is a pure outside linebacker. He is that size and that twitchiness, who has some coverage ability. You like to have that. If he plays off ball a little bit like Bowser did, that's a fine use of him on 3rd down. But if he actually just lines up right on the edge, that's a fine use of him too. But I don't see him as a guy who's going to play off ball. Same thing with Harrison. They've talked about it for a year and a half. There's been an option to try and do that. I think they probably, first of all, I think you want to focus on Malik on one position. And I think ideally that would be the Mike, and have him be a 2-down Mike for the Ravens, who, if anything were to happen to Josh Bynes, he's ready to step in. I don't think that's really, you want Queen still at the trail position on a significant number of plays. And I know it doesn't always work out that way based on where the tight end aligns or if there's motion, but he's basically a weak side linebacker at this point. And I would, I think the Ravens will prefer to see him there.
Yeah. And I know that The inside linebacker position is one where people say they need to add someone. I don't think it is as big of a need because they don't necessarily have to use inside linebackers all the time with the 3 safety looks and all the other DB looks they can use. But Ken, where are some of the positions on this roster where you feel very confident in the depth that they have built, whether it is through free agency or the draft?
Safety is the easy answer on that one. And you hit the nail on the head there in terms of some of the ability the Ravens will have to align versus opponents, particularly when they have the lead. I think this is going to be a very, very fun team to watch with the lead. 2-touchdown lead in the second half, and the Ravens are able to put 7 DBs on the field and dare the other team to run the ball. You're actually telling them you're not going to pass the ball. They've had so much success with that in the past, in 2019 in particular. I'm looking back at that Buffalo game, and that was a big one. The Ravens allowed, I want to get this correct here, 9.3 yards per rush with the dime defense on the field, which seems like, boy, we got to not have the dime defense on the field every time, except that was on 9 plays. And on 20 pass plays, they allowed 0.4 yards per play. So they made that work. So anyway, I think that we might see things like that from the Ravens this year. And I think that'll be really fun if McDonald goes all out on that. We don't know what kind of defensive coordinator he is in terms of his willingness to go to extreme packages. And whatever you might say about Wink, he was very willing to use extreme packages as he deployed the defense.
Yeah, I'm very excited about safety and corner as well. There is a bit more uncertainty there with the return of Peters and some of the young guys potentially needing to step in if Kyle Fuller doesn't work out. And I know people are excited for him, but I know there are some mixed reviews on the Fuller signing, but also defensive line, even minus Derek Wolfe. I feel like they've done a good job at adding there. And I mean, tight end, the room is really deep. They have 4 guys. I think we're talking about 4 tight ends making this roster at this point, because I don't envision them cutting either of their 4th rounders. Obviously, Mark Andrews is here to stay, and Boyle, I think, also is a key part of the offense. So they have a lot of depth at a lot of different positions. But we'll head into our first break here. When we get back, we'll be talking about how the Ravens can improve on the offensive side of the ball heading into 2022. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Rock Auto, and this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need, and sometimes you have to go through pointless or even simply intimidating questioning about whether the person behind the counter orders the parts of their computer, and you can only really choose the brand their warehouse happens to carry. But now you have users access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You can save a ton of time and money when using Rock Auto. They're a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and their prices are super, super low for every customer. You can go explore the easy-to-use website today to find the solution your auto parts needs. So go to rockauto.com right now. See other parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On there. How'd you hear about us? By so you know we sent you amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oshek still here with Ken McKusick of Filmstudy. And Ken, this 2022 season is a big one because I think there's so much room to bounce back for the Ravens. 8-9, obviously the 6-game losing streak, and part of the 6-game losing streak there was Lamar Jackson going out. The offense sputtered. They couldn't score points, and there are a bunch of areas they can improve upon. So talking about where those areas are, do you have one big one that you kind of circle on your list and say this is the absolute number one area you'd like to see them improve the most heading into 2022 here?
I mean, they're last in the league in pass defense, so that's got to be number one. They got to get back to running the football, which I think will happen with Jackson. I would separate that one because I don't think there's any doubt it will work out if Lamar is under center or in the shotgun as he is more often. But the big thing is the pass defense has got to come back, and a lot of people might be surprised to hear me say that's largely dependent on the offense. The offense needs to be able to provide leads for the defense to be able to play good pass defense. And they'll play the best pass defense if they can get their inside linebackers off the field, because they've got inside linebackers on this team that just are not good cover guys. For the last 3 years, it's been the area of the team that's been most exposed defensively is coverage at inside linebacker. And they really need to adapt to the personnel they have, in my opinion. Don't try and fit square pegs in a round hole. If Patrick Queen can't cover, just take him off the field on third down on obvious passing downs. If you can't trust Josh Bynes to be on the field on those downs, you got to take him off. They had Board last year. I think that Tony Jefferson will effectively have the Board role this year. I would guess he'll be the Mike linebacker on obvious passing downs. That would be my take on it. Again, And then they'll also have a dime, which means they'll really have 7 defensive backs on the field. And that'll give them the understanding of coverage lanes, the understanding of what's going on behind these players that a safety gives you in low zone that I think will be extremely valuable. So I think their chance to succeed is high based on the defensive personnel. I think it's even higher because of what the offense can do to provide those leads that'll allow them to play the extreme packages.
Right. And it's a great point you make, because I'm really excited personally to see hopefully an improvement with big plays, that being with the run game and with the pass game as well. I know the deep ball accuracy of Tyler Huntley was something that was one of his biggest weaknesses. We didn't really see a lot of deep ball connections with Huntley, and obviously with Jackson in the fold, I think that automatically improves that. But the running game in general, I mean, we didn't see a bunch of those 20, 30, 40-yard rips that we were so used to seeing with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. How important is that to you, that aspect of the offense, to be able to get out to those big leads in a hurry while also being able to sustain them throughout the game with the defense?
Right. For all of 18 through 21, all of the Jackson era, 18 through 20, the Ravens had the stable of backs, acquired all very cheaply, frankly, that would be able to threaten all the areas horizontally along the line of scrimmage. And that's what they need. They need to have a speed back for the outside. They want a power back on the inside. They want Lamar Jackson, obviously, to be threatening one of 2 different positions he can, either outside or right up the middle, depending on where the running back is aligned, pistol or sidecar. So they need to have that. Last year, they had a bunch of slower, older backs, and none of them were able to really threaten the outside at all. And their yards per carry were not terrible, which is a little bit of credit to the run blocking of the interior offensive line. Bozeman and Zeitler both played pretty well last year. McCary at tackle was probably, was not a bad run blocker, and that's something. But you have the they need to have a complete set of running back abilities on the team. It's very important. And we see, just getting this veteran group together in a year after COVID, where there weren't as many available players that were year one players, say, who had been on somebody's practice squad the year before. There wasn't as much of that around the league in general. So running back depth was kind of at a lower level than normal. And that really, I think, was what caused them to sign some of these older guys that really didn't work out.
Yeah, I know a lot of people had high expectations for Latavius Murray and Freeman. To Freeman's credit, personally, I think he struggled to start the year and then actually came on a decent bit towards the end. But it wasn't what a lot of people got used to with Dobbins and Edwards and just what they were able to bring. I mean, Dobbins led the league, or led all running backs in yards per carry his rookie season with 6. They had 3 guys in the top 10 in yards per carry that year, with Lamar Jackson leading the entire league. So it was an added element of that offense that all of a sudden just gets taken away. And they have to work with, you mentioned the interior offensive line play that actually was pretty decent. The tackle play overall was not wonderful. It was not great. Obviously, they had to shuffle some pieces around. The expectation was Ronnie Stanley was going to come back. He comes back for week 1. Doesn't work out that way. I'm excited for some improved tackle depth. Obviously, we don't know where Stanley is right now, when he will be back. But, I mean, I feel, we talk about depth, a lot more confident in their depth this year and how that can improve too.
I don't know how you could be less confident than what we had last year in terms of depth. The AV signing was frankly mocked by a lot of Pittsburgh fans who knew he kind of lost it at left tackle. Then moving him to right tackle, AV's body type is a tall, lean tight end, basically, and he was getting pushed off balance a lot. One of the things I look for in offensive line play is making sure that tackles in particular, but really offensive line play, all offensive linemen, but it's particularly important for tackles who have to maintain a mirror in pass defense more, or it's more important that they do it. Don't get your feet too close together. And Villanueva had so many instances in this last year where he either crossed his feet, which happened occasionally. Usually it's right at the ankles. It's not completely noticeable. Or his feet just got close together, and the defensive lineman immediately knows what to look for there. And he knows that's a great time to get a bull rush going, get him off balance. And he was very ineffective in terms of the amount of pressure he gave up. PFF and I have a difference in our scoring methodology, but I can tell you most of that is due to the difference between 2.5 and 3 second pressures, and how much Villanueva was allowing that throwing cone to be impacted. So he was giving up a lot of push where Jackson or Huntley, either one, was not able to confidently step into his throw because of the proximity of that defensive end on that side.
Right. And I know with the tackle play, it does impact the speed of the quarterback, just the play speed of it, how the plays work, that internal clock in the quarterback's head. And I know that when the season was going on and we just saw Lamar Jackson running for his life, because every play it seemed like the tackles were just caving in and forcing Lamar Jackson either out of the pocket or forcing him to throw the ball early. And I think that did have an impact on decision making. Ken, I know we talked about this on your show, but personally, I'd love to see improvement from Lamar Jackson in his decision making from what we saw last year. I'm not saying he's a bad decision maker overall, but I think based off of the tackle play and what we saw, the decision making, whether it was him running when there was an open throwing lane or throwing when there was an open running lane, and some of those interceptions that he threw, some of them weren't his fault, obviously, but others, you could say, oh, well, why'd you make that throw when this is there? Throwing it out of bounds instead of taking a sack in certain situations, which you would have liked to see a bit more. I mean, what's the decision-making level with you with Lamar Jackson in terms of what you'd like to see improvement-wise there?
Yeah, I mean, a few of the interceptions he had last year were just bad, right to the defender interceptions. They weren't a case of a tip ball or whatever. He threw, he didn't throw them all. 9 interceptions thrown at Mark Andrews last year. So there are elements of Andrews being the only receiver that probably need to improve. So if there were more receivers that he had a high degree of trust in as a play was extended, I think that's a good thing. Now, certainly we saw some fantastic plays from Andrews, but the passer rating throwing to him was only in the 90s, which is incredible given the year that Andrews had last year. Whereas if you look back to Nick Boyle in 2019, who wasn't catching a lot of long balls, and that those obviously fit into passer rating, but the passer rating thrown to him that year is 133. So the difference is really in the interceptions and how often those are occurring, on plays to that. And when you're throwing the ball to Nick Boyle, it's usually because Nick Boyle is wide open. And if you're throwing the ball to Mark Andrews, you might be in a position where you need to have a completion and you take a little extra interception risks. I understand that, but there's other times when the Mark Andrews risk is hurting Lamar a little bit. I also want to address one other thing you said, because this is something, as the season moved along, it wasn't just judgment. It was a matter of the pocket was being infringed upon, and Roman was having to change the play calling to scheme for a lack of pocket presence that Huntley has. So Huntley doesn't have a good internal clock. He doesn't really know to get rid of the ball. His natural instinct is to reverse his field and see if he can find space and then throw again. And that can be deadly in the NFL. Lamar much more adept at moving around the pocket in that way, and it's something that I want to I would differentiate for the two. And if you saw how Marquise Brown's numbers in terms of yards per catch, ADOT came down towards the end of the year, that was pretty much all a function of Roman being forced to change the offense because of Huntley's lack of pocket awareness.
Yeah, from what I think people were expecting with a fully healthy unit versus what we saw at the end of the season, minus Dobbins, Edwards, Jackson, Stanley, everybody who was out, there was a lot of adjustment that had to be made. I mean, the Ravens in 2019 and 2020, just from a simple numbers perspective, were the bottom-ranked team in terms of pass attempts. That number skyrockets to 9th in 2021 just because of the product of the players they had and the personnel they used. So, yeah, I mean, the offense from Jackson to Huntley definitely did look different. I mean, they barely scored over 20 points a game, and I think their last 6 games, they were right around the 10, 16-point range, so they weren't putting up a ton of points. But I do think with decision-making, it all kind of ties into each other. Like the tackle play being better will impact the decision-making where these guys aren't forced. These guys, their internal clocks aren't sped up, and obviously with Jackson on the field instead of Huntley, that's an obvious upgrade, and he's the starter there for a reason. I know there was some of that debate about Jackson and Huntley. Jackson is the starter. No debate about that here, but we'll head into our final break on Locked On Ravens. Still a ton to talk about. We'll flip over, talk about defensive improvements this team could make in 2022. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a little bit about Built Bar. And you know how our friends at Built Bar are always coming out with amazing new flavors. Well, this time Built has truly outdone themselves with their new Mud Pie flavor. And for the first time ever, Built is introducing the new Mud Pie flavor in both Mud Pie Bar and Mud Pie Puff. And if you're not sure what Mud Pie tastes like, if you're a chocolate fan, you might need to sit down for this one because the new Mud Pie Bar is rich in whipped cream and has chocolate mousse. It's smarter than 100% real chocolate and topped with cookies and cream crumble. So you've got to try this as soon as possible, but they're going fast. fast. They're available right now at Built.com, but because they're delicious, they are flying off the shelves. And like all Built bars, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That means they're healthy and tasty. So go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Ken McKusick of Filmstudy. And Ken, the defensive unit for the Ravens. Injuries were definitely a storyline. The pass defense, as you talked about in the second segment, also a bit of a storyline. Where would you like to see improvement there? Obviously ranked bottom 5 in a lot of categories. One of those, there were miscommunications, lack of tackling. I mean, where are the key points for you in improvement in the pass defense?
So I think we talked about the first one in the last segment, or in maybe the first segment, about the safety depth that they have, and I think a lot of that can address the inside linebacker shortcomings in pass defense we've seen over the last couple of years. That to me is the biggest change they can make. Other than that, they have to find their slot corner from among the groups they have. I don't think Kyle Fuller is it. I think that Fuller is a backup on the outside. His play in the slot wasn't good this last year. He got benched twice during the season. I know he's playing his first slot corner, but I honestly, I think any surprise they get from Fuller is probably going to be a bad one and not a good one. So hopefully, in an ideal season, the two main corners stay healthy. Fuller rides the pine the entire year, and they find their slot corner, whether it's Pepe Williams or Armour-Davis Washington or whoever it might be. And that's their guy going forward. And it should be obvious. I think it's obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that you're much better suited trying to find out what Armour-Davis Washington has, a second-year player, or Pepe Williams has, a rookie, than you are trying to figure out if Kyle Fuller can play the slot. If Kyle Fuller has to play the slot at some point during the year, go ahead. But you have a lot more future gains from finding out that either Armour-Davis Washington or Pepe Williams can do it, because you have their control over their contracts for more years.
Right, and I know the void that Tavon Young left. I mean, he was a player that he was really the only one the Ravens could have cut and had significant, considering what they were, salary cap savings compared to some of the other guys. I know Villanueva saved them some cap when he retired, but they weren't cutting Marcus Peters, I felt like, the whole time. That was someone who they could save money with, but it just didn't make sense. So I feel like for Tavon Young, he was a player that definitely was still an asset when healthy. That was the big part with him, when healthy. But now they have a couple of options. But Ken, an interesting player that I kind of want to get your opinion on the role for is Brandon Stephens. They're classified as the versatile DB on the Ravens roster on their website. Do you view him as a slot guy? Obviously filled in for Deshaun Elliott last year at the safety position. Where is his ideal role for you and what they can do for him in that role?
I don't think he'll see time at safety this year, and I could be wrong about that, and injuries have a way of dictating that to be other than I would predict now anyway, so it doesn't really matter in some sense what I think. But the Ravens are 5 deep at safety, and I think all of those guys outside of Brandon Williams are going to make the team, and that includes Geno Stone, Jefferson, Clark, and Williams and Hamilton, of course. But Brandon Williams would be a 6th safety on the team. I don't really think he projects to play there. I think ideally he'll get his time at outside corner in the preseason. I think given his physical size, his physicality, I think it makes more sense for him to be on the outside where he can use the boundaries, the extra defender, get physical with the guy near the sideline, all the things that you can gain an advantage on. And I think if he could succeed there, that could be a start of a really good career for him on the outside. It did not work out at safety last year for Brandon. Didn't have a bad tackling year, and the Ravens needed a good tackler on the back end, but he did have a very bad coverage year. Throwing to him, the passer rating was 148.6. So that's pretty near perfect. You don't want to have that happen. I don't want that guy, even with decent speed, being a guy whose instincts we're relying on the back end. I think Marcus Williams and Hamilton, although Hamilton is a lot slower, has marvelous instincts, marvelous quick reader on the back end. And I think that the pair of free safeties there gives the Ravens a lot of advantages. Could we see Stephens come back as a dime back? He's probably big enough to do the job, but Chuck Clark was great in that role in 2019. And I have a hard time believing Chuck's not still going to be on the field for all the plays, frankly, with the green dot. But Harbaugh's recent statement might tell you otherwise, that they might be moving that green dot still.
Right, and I'm interested to see what they do with the green dot, definitely. But Clark has been a player, just such a glue guy, such a huge part of that defense. He's not the best player on the defense, but one of the most important for sure. But Ken, moving over to the front 7, I think pass rush is something people would like to see improvement with. I know the sack number is pretty inconsistent under Don Martindale. Interior pressure, not really a factor for the last couple of seasons. Calais Campbell was brought in because of his sack numbers on the interior. Doesn't really have the production. Derek Wolfe was brought in, a decent sack guy for the Broncos. Didn't really have a ton of production in his 1 year in Baltimore. Where would you like to see improvement with the pass rush, and how can they do that?
Yeah, again, the easiest way to get a really good pass rush going, get the lead. So if Jackson produces the kind of efficiency on offense the Ravens had somewhere between 19 and 20, that pass rush is going to be very dominant. And we're going to say, oh, look at the Ravens pass rush. It's all improved. Well, it's not. It's they, they're able to play the 7 defensive backs whenever they want, or 6 a lot of times. And they're able to tee off on the quarterback in a way that they hadn't been able to do in 21 when they were trailing for a lot of these games. So the key thing is putting yourself in position where you can have a effective pass rush. And I think they have enough different players, some of whom can win one-on-one matchups, others who can imperil the pocket another way. They have good stunt players on this team, good stunt twist players, including a number of good under players. They have some good over players too in terms of speed, but under players are sometimes harder to find in Ravens history. Trevor Price or Tim Jernigan, guys like that, Pernell McPhee, who really contributed to those sort of underneath stunt twist players, can end up being the guys who oftentimes get the better pass rush opportunity. Ravens have a lot of that on this team. They have Urban, I think, is a guy who now will replace Wolfe, almost as certain to make the roster, in my opinion. Travis Jones will be a guy I think people can go over a lot of time, loop over. He's certainly an under guy, if anything. And Campbell, either an under or over guy, frankly, still at his age, but probably a better under guy. And there'll be lots of opportunities to twist and stunt. I think they probably will show a few less numbers blitzes than they did with Wink. I don't think they'll be in the 30% of 5+ anymore. I think we'll be seeing a few less in that regard. But I do still expect lots of deception with this pass rush. And as I say oftentimes, there's 4-man pass rushes and there's 4-man pass rushes. You can rush 4 straight up. Everybody knows who's coming from where. And if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, maybe you can make that work. Or if you're some other teams, maybe you can make that work. If you're the Ravens, you might have to do a zone blitz and try and overload one side, even though you're still rushing 4.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways the pass rush can improve. I think their personnel, I think, is better equipped for it on the interior. Obviously I would still like to see them add a Justin Houston or Jason Pierre-Paul to get them a veteran option there. But Ken, moving back over to the safeties, we actually had a mailbag question about it, and it's from Connor, and he asked, how will Mike Macdonald get the most out of the 5 talented safeties currently on the roster, assuming Chuck Clark stays? And you kind of dove into this a little bit, but I'm very interested because there are the 3 safety look potentials, using Jefferson in the Mike position. What are your ideal looks for them, whether it's on 3rd down, maybe coming out on 1st down with 3 safeties? Where would you like to see them use these guys?
I think we'll see more 3 safety looks on a broader set of downs. So we're going to see more big nickel this year when other teams put 12 on the field. So you put 2 tight ends on the field, it means you usually have a tight end in the slot. And not usually 2 inline tight ends, but it can be a running formation too. But usually you have a tight end in the slot. That's a great time to bring in big nickel and get a 3rd safety on that instead of a 3rd corner in your nickel package. So I think we'll see a heavy prevalence of that, and that'll be a way to get Hamilton on the field more than he would otherwise play, or maybe a way to get Clark on the field more if Hamilton has the green dot. In terms of who plays on the inside, I think they will mercilessly remove their inside linebackers from the field this year. At least that's what I'm predicting. It's certainly what I'm hoping for, is that we see a lot of 1 ILB looks, and there's several different ways that can happen. You can play a what I call a jumbo nickel, where you use only 1 inside linebacker. You get an extra down lineman on the field. The Ravens are fairly well suited to do that as a method of run defense. They've got good safeties that run fit well for that kind of scheme. So we may see some looks that'll give you that. Those could be big nickel jumbo looks as well. So that would be one way to do it. The other way is I think we'll see as much dime and quarter as we've ever seen from this team. A lot of that is predicated on the Ravens generating some points offensively. But if they can and they get leads, they should go pretty much exclusively to dime and quarter looks. I think that's their strongest defense. It certainly gives them their best pass defense. And it doesn't matter whether it's 1st down, 2nd down, or whatever. If you're leading by 14 in the second half, just go ahead and put the dime and the quarter out there right away.
Yeah, they have. It's so great how the safety position is with how many players they have that can play all these different roles. And I agree. I think we will see more 3 safety looks. I don't think they have to force themselves to play 2 inside linebackers all the time because they have players who can fill that skill set, but have the coverage skills that are better than a Queen or a Bynes. And you can use those guys in those different situations. But Ken, also, when talking about the Ravens, I don't think you can skip out on special teams. And that unit has always been one of the best in football. Devin Duvernay obviously making his name known, Justin Tucker, we know that. But also just the guys that gun, the guys that do all these things for the special teams unit. A question from Arthur Izzy is, how will special teams affect the roster? And also we throw something else in here about how many players on the 90-man roster will be traded for 2023 draft picks, which is interesting in itself. But let's start off with special teams. How do you think special teams will impact this roster just based off of how important it is for the team?
Yeah, I think this year will be one of the first years in recent memory that there isn't a guy who makes the roster that's exclusively a special teams guy. And when I say that, there probably will be a guy or two who makes the roster and doesn't do anything but play special teams the whole year, but he's not there to do that. He has an important backup role on the defense or the offense, would be my guess as to where the things. So they don't have Jordan Richards. They don't have Anthony Levine this year, and Levine hadn't played really defensively more than a few snaps in the last couple of years. I don't think they'll have a guy like that. So I think that, Tony Jefferson will be on the team, and he may only end up playing 50 to 100 defensive snaps if they don't get to play as much quarter as I hope they would play. But he might play more, and he's certainly available to play more if he's needed. Or if they might at some point decide Geno Stone is the guy they want as the 4th safety on the field when they play a 7 DB look. In which case Jefferson is just the captain of special teams, and that's okay. But all those guys could be. And the important thing about the safety position in particular is if they're going to play a lot of 4 safety looks, you really got to have 5 on the roster. You have to have a 5 to make 4 situation for any given week. If you might have an injury, you can't all of a sudden have that preclude you from playing one of your important defensive packages. So that's one of the important things. On offense, I see the same kind of thing. I think, the tight ends and the running backs and the wide receivers that they have in there, I don't think they'll have a Chris Moore on the team. Tylan Wallace, I expect to get playing time at X and see time there. I think we'll see basically these players all have an offensive role. And I really think, as much as it used to be, there's going to be 2 or 3 spots that are decided entirely on special teams, there better not be. That's not a good thing for your team to have that be true. You want to have 53 guys on your team. Okay, 50 after the specialists are taken out, right? Maybe 48 after the quarterbacks are taken out, who can really play offense or defense in addition to their special teams role. The special teams role should be the other thing they do.
Yeah, I know that other guys, like some of the DBs, like I know Pepe Williams could have some run on special teams, but they have the players now that they can still see defensive snaps and not exclusively play 95% of their snaps on special teams or 98% of their snaps on special teams. They have guys who can play offense, can play defense, but also have the special teams ability to play it at a high level. It's not like they'd be like sacrificing special teams quality just because they don't have those types of players. I think they have those guys, but they can still do a bunch of other things. But Ken, getting into the other part of Arthur's question here, there are some of these players, like they have a ton of depth. And I feel like they aren't necessarily going to have roster space for all that depth. So I know they could take the Ben Bredesen route with some of these guys and try to get draft capital. I know people have talked about Ben Powers as a potential one of those guys, but do you see players on this 90-man roster getting traded for draft picks because the Ravens would just know we want this guy, but we can't keep him?
Yeah, I think that's likely. And it's a good result if it happens because it means the Ravens' depth is held up. So, if they're going into cornerback, look at it this way. With one more serviceable corner than they actually need, and then they have to trade one at the end of camp, that's a good thing. It was sad to see, to lose Nigel Warrior at the end of last camp, but it was good that the Ravens' depth held up. They were able to do it. Same thing with Bredesen. That's a great example of a specific player who, frankly, had no place on the Ravens anyway. But it didn't. The Ravens got something in return for him, which was good. And I think that's likely to happen again. The Ravens have some players who are 4th-year players who might be traded for another 4th year in a player-for-player trade. That doesn't always work out because you really have to match up your needs. But oftentimes the conditional 6 or conditional 7 pick that you can get for a player at the end of your depth chart makes a lot of sense too. So there should be options, and I'm sure EDC will not hesitate to pull the trigger if it's appropriate for the team.
Yeah, he did. I mean, fourth round pick for Bredesen in the sixth. Great value there. Greg Mance they got a pick out of Greg Mance, who I thought, no way they're going to be able to get a pick out of him, but they did it. So credit to Eric DaCosta. I mean, it was a phenomenal job by him. But Ken, finally, the last part of Arthur's question, will the Ravens only have 4 wide receivers and 4 on the practice squad? I know there's been a lot of conversation about, is it going to be 5 wide receivers or 6 wide receivers? Do you see a path where it's just 4 guys and they keep 4 on the practice squad? Or do you think that 5 or 6 is much more realistic?
Never say never, but I would tend to believe it will be 5 wide receivers, and we'll see how that goes. It may be an inactive every week, and you may only have 4 active on a typical week. Remember, the Ravens have to somehow find 5 inactives out of a 53-man roster. Injuries will dictate some of that as the season goes along, but you have to make some tough calls early on that. There are some other guys who are on the margin of the roster. Okay, but we want to stick with wide receivers here since that was the question asked. I think it's more likely to have 5 than 4. And I think if you go down a roster, almost every year, the roster is determined on a 25, 25, and 3 basis. So you rarely, no matter how much people say, I think this could be the year they take 26 or even 27 on defense, because that's where the good special teams players are coming. They just don't do that. And, 25 and 25 will probably be where it is. And once you get to that point and you realize, well, there's either 9 or 10 offensive linemen, there's these 4 tight ends, there's 3 running backs, there's 2 quarterbacks, you really realize that there's probably 5 spots for wide receivers are what they will end up with.
Yeah, and whether that is a veteran, whether it is some of the undrafted guys, they have very talented players. Benjamin Victor, Mekhi Polk, Shamar Bridges. Not maybe necessarily the guys that are needle movers in their first year, but I think the wide receiver room with the Ravens, not necessarily a star-studded group when you look at other rooms around the league, but I think talent all around, Bateman moving up to that number 1 spot. But you're right, we could see 5 guys make it, then 4 active every game day. I think that does make a lot of sense considering just where they might need they need an extra DB active, an extra defensive lineman active, an extra offensive lineman active they could take out from that wide receiver position just to make sure they have all the positions necessary there. But Ken, I appreciate you coming on. This was great. Thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you and your work and what you're up to?
Appreciate it. Yes, I'm filmstudybaltimore.com. If you want to come and look at all the stuff there's the articles from last year and the podcast. I produce a podcast every day, much like Kevin, all 7 days a week. So if you want a podcast to listen to, you've always got a new one every day. We've been doing an expectations series. There's been a lot of fun. Take 2 players, 1 on offense, 1 on defense, and talk about what would be a good or great year for them this year. Kevin did Lamar Jackson, so we had a lot of fun doing that. And otherwise, I'm at Film Study Ravens on Twitter, and love to hear from you there.
Yeah, Ken does great work. The link to his Twitter, his podcast will be in the description below on YouTube. Be sure to check it out. Again, Ken does great work. You heard it here for about 40 minutes today, but I appreciate you coming on, Ken. That's all we have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens content, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.